The Sinking of the Titanic and Other Great Sea Disasters, edited by Logan Marshall. Chapter 6. Women and Children First. Cool-headed officers and crew bring order out of chaos. Filling the lifeboats. Heart-rending scenes as families are parted. 4 lifeboats lost. Incidents of bravery. The boats are filled. Once on the deck, many hesitated to enter the swinging lifeboats. The glassy sea, the starlit sky, the absence, in the first few moments, of intense excitement gave them the feeling that there was only some slight mishap, that those who got into the boats would have a chilly half-hour below and might, later, be laughed at. It was such a feeling as this, from all accounts, which caused John Jacob Astor and his wife to refuse the places offered them in the first boat, and to retire to the gymnasium. In the same way, H.J. Allison, a Montreal banker, laughed at the warning, and his wife, reassured by him, took her time dressing. They and their daughter did not reach the Carpathia. Their son, less than 2 years old, was carried into a lifeboat by his nurse, and was taken in charge by Major Arthur Peuchen. The lifeboats lowered. The admiration felt by the passengers and crew for the matchlessly appointed vessel was translated, in those first few moments, into a confidence which, for some, proved deadly. The pulsing of the engines had ceased, and the steamship lay just as though she were awaiting the order to go on again after some trifling matter had been adjusted. But in a few minutes the canvas covers were lifted from the lifeboats, and the crews allotted to each standing by, ready to lower them into the water. Nearly all the boats that were lowered on the port side of the ship touched the water without capsizing. 4 of the others lowered to starboard, including one collapsible, were capsized. All, however, who were in the collapsible boats that practically went to pieces were rescued by the other boats. Presently the order was heard. "All men stand back, and all women retire to the deck below." That was the smoking room deck, or the B deck. The men stood away and remained in absolute silence, leaning against the rail or pacing up and down the deck slowly. Many of them lighted cigars or cigarettes and began to smoke. Loading the boats. The boats were swung out and lowered from the A deck above. The women were marshaled quietly in lines along the B deck, and when the boats were lowered down to the level of the ladder, the women were assisted to climb into them. As each of the boats was filled with its quota of passengers, the word was given, and it was carefully lowered down to the dark surface of the water. Nobody seemed to know how Mr. Ismay got into a boat, but it was assumed that he wished to make a presentation of the case of the Titanic to his company. He was among those who apparently realized that the splendid ship was doomed. All hands in the lifeboats, under instructions from officers and men in charge, were rowed a considerable distance from the ship herself, in order to get away from the possible suction that would follow her foundering. Coolest men on board. Captain Smith and Major Archibald Butt, military aide to the President of the United States, were among the coolest men on board. A number of steerage passengers were yelling and screaming and fighting to get to the boats. Officers drew guns and told them that if they moved towards the boats they would be shot dead. Major Butt had a gun in his hand and covered the men who tried to get to the boats. The following story of his bravery was told by Mrs. Henry B. Harris, wife of the theatrical manager. "The world should rise in praise of Major Butt. That man's conduct will remain in my memory forever. The American army is honored by him and the way he taught some of the other men how to behave when women and children were suffering that awful mental fear of death. Major Butt was near me, and I noticed everything that he did. When the order to man the boats came, the captain whispered something to Major Butt. The 2 of them had become friends. The major immediately became as one in supreme command. You would have thought he was at a White House reception. A dozen or more women became hysterical all at once, as something connected with a lifeboat went wrong. Major Butt stepped over to them and said, 'Really, you must not act like that. We were all going to see you through this thing.' He helped the sailors rearrange the rope or chain that had gone wrong, and lifted some of the women in with a touch of gallantry. Not only was there a complete lack of any fear in his manner, but there was the action of an aristocrat. When the time came he was a man to be feared. In one of the earlier boats 50 women, it seemed, were about to be lowered, when a man, suddenly panic-stricken, ran to the stern of it. Major Butt shot one arm out, caught him by the back of the neck, and jerked him backward like a pillow. His head cracked against a rail, and he was stunned. "Sorry," said Major Butt. "Women will be attended to first, or I'll break every damned bone in your body."